Welcome to the World of Eora, a news and lore podcast about Pillars of Eternity and Avowed, as created by Obsidian Entertainment. I'm your host, Eric, aka Gingerino. Thank you all for listening. Let's get into today's lore. Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of the World of Eora. I'm your host Eric aka Gingerino. Thanks everyone for joining me on another episode as we dive into the history, lore, and game mechanics for Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2 as we gear up for the release of Avowed. If you're wondering why do we pair Avowed with Pillars of Eternity, it's because they share the same fantasy setting known as Eora. So as the theory goes, if we dive into those first two Pillars of Eternity games, then we can glean some insights into what Avowed might be like in terms of story and learn a little bit more about the world and appreciate the nuance in the story that is sure to be there in Avowed. As well, it's just an opportunity for those of us who like the Pillars of Eternity games or really like the fantasy world of Eora to dive into some geeky stuff that we know and love. If you are new here, welcome to the show. Happy to have you here. Really excited to have you as part of the conversation. I'm going to signpost you towards episode 0 if you're more interested in learning some of the foundational lore for this world, but this is a beginner-friendly episode as well, and I'll explain any concepts that come up to people that are perhaps new here. In today's episode, I am going to be covering the final two grand adventures of Caed. Now, if you've been listening to the show for a while, you might be familiar with this. Long story short, when you're playing the first Pillars of Eternity game, you can send companions on adventures that happen off-screen, and then you get a report of that adventure. And within the pitch for the adventure and the conclusion of the adventure, there's a lot of lore that's talked about in there, as well as just interesting to kind of ask about some of the implications of stuff that we read from those adventures. These adventures are tiered anywhere from the minor category to the legendary category, and a while ago I did episodes on the grand adventure tier, but I didn't finish it off, and I promised I would come back and finish it, and so this is what I'm doing. So today we're going to be talking about two adventures from the grand tier of these off-screen companion adventures. No real news regarding Avowed or Pillars of Eternity or even Obsidian related as of yet. There's a couple of articles about Avowed put out recently, one of which speaks about how, I believe the title has something to do with out of the frying pan into the fire, and I think it has to do with the fact that they delayed Avowed partly because there was too much going on in November, and now there's a whole bunch going on in the first quarter of 2025, and so Avowed is just as crowded. That being said, personally speaking, my theory is that a lot of it had to do with Dragon Age, just because Dragon Age is very much in the same vein and also a behemoth of a game in the RPG industry. That might be why they delayed it there. Of course, the official reason is that there was just too much Xbox Game Pass stuff going on, but whatever. Anyways, the other article that's written has to do with the timeline of Avowed in the World of Eora, which I've talked about on previous episodes, but it might be interesting to actually just sit down and talk about where it is on the timeline. So perhaps I'll do that in a future episode, but go ahead and check that one out. I believe both of them are on Game Rant if either of them interest you. Otherwise, nothing to talk about news-wise today, so let's just dive straight into the lore.
I'm curious. What exactly did you find there?
So, as mentioned, these are two adventures that you get from Pillars of Eternity 1 when you are managing your stronghold. Now, just as a quick backup here, in Pillars of Eternity 1, there are a lot of things that you do that are part of the regular RPG tropes. One of those things is that you become Lord and Master of an entire castle keep in this game known as Caed. As Lord and Master of Caed, you sometimes have missions or adventures or things that you can do thrown at your feet that, oh, Lord and Master, please help us do these things or whatever. Anyways, or someone wants to hire you or an envoy that represents you to do something for them, etc., etc. Now, you're busy doing your thing during the whole Pillars of Eternity narrative. So what you can do as Lord of Caed is you can send one of your companions to do these quests for you. So these are off-screen adventures, off-screen quests that your companion does instead and then returns with, and you get a mechanical gameplay benefit from them, like a unique item and some money and experience, etc., etc. I've already done episodes on the legendary tier of these off-screen adventures. These adventures range from minor adventures, which are very short and usually within the same area of Caed, to what are called legendary adventures that take places on continents far, far away, dealing with esoteric knowledge and large entities and massive concepts, right? So there's this wide range of adventures that are happening off screen that are actually really interesting, and I think a lot of people accidentally skip over. So I've already done all of the legendary adventures, and I did an episode, I think a little bit before episode 100, I did a bunch of the grand adventures, but I didn't have enough time to finish them, and I promised I would return to them one day, so that's what we're doing here. So let's finish off the last 2 grand adventures that we get from the Caed Stronghold missions in Pillars of Eternity 1. This first off-screen companion adventure that we're going to talk about today is called The Wax Maker. Now, for each one of these adventures, there is going to be a pitch for the adventure and a conclusion. So the pitch is kind of the build-up for it. It's kind of the hook, the thing that tells you like what it is we want this companion to do. And the conclusion lets you know kind of the outcome of what happens as a result of their adventuring. And then it lets you know, what loot that you get from this as well. Side note, for those who are into tabletop role-playing games, especially if you're playing a game in the World of Eora, these make for great hooks for quests and adventures that you can write for your players, especially if they're not really aware of some of these adventures, but you can always change a detail here or there, give a twist ending or your own personal spin on it to liven it up or to have a fresh take. But it's definitely, there's a lot of good inspiration here. But anyway, so the pitch for the Wax Maker off-screen companion adventure. In the southern Aedir province of Maghanan, the wizard and inventor Galef spent decades creating devices that could mimic magical effects and properties. His fellow wizards viewed Galef's work with disdain, but one area of research intrigued even the elitists, a device that could replicate entire magical objects. The key to Galef's research was an enchanted mold. When Galef died of old age, his remote workshop was eventually plundered by southern barbarians who had been sacking the province for years. All of his work was believed to have been lost. Recently, an anonymous patron has been inquiring across the Eastern Reach for aid in recovering some of Galef's research notes, using leads that were discovered by unknown means. So this is the entire pitch for the adventure that you'll send a companion on. So just to give a little context of what we're reading here, in the southern Aedir province of Maghanan. So Aedir is one of the grand empires of the world that have been around for centuries. It's actually the place that the player character from Avowed is going to be, the envoy. You're from Aedir. And the setting for the first Pillars of Eternity game, a nation known as Dyrwood, was originally a colony founded by Aedir. So you can think of Aedir almost like Europe, and the Eastern Reach continent as North America, and the Dyrwood is like the U.S. or something like that. That's how I think of it, anyways. But yeah, so we learn a couple things here. One, that Aedir, the continent of Aedir, this nation of Aedir across the ocean, they're split up into provinces, and one such province is named Maghanon, Maghanon. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, but there you go. Within this province of Maghanon is a wizard, an inventor known as Galef, or there was one. Apparently they had died. This is largely about getting a lot of his works and his notes back. If he was a character in Dungeons & Dragons, it sounds like he would be more of an artificer than anything else. He spent decades creating devices that could mimic magical effects and properties. And apparently, one area of research that he had was creating a device that could replicate entire magical objects. We don't get any information on how this would work. Magic in the World of Eora is very interesting. It all has to do with essence, which is the substance or the stuff that souls in this world are made of, and everything has a soul. You have a soul, I have a soul. There's actually ambient soul energy within the atmosphere, rocks, trees, and the in-between, which is the state between life and death. So there's this essence is everywhere, and that's how magic is used within this world. So it would be interesting to see what kind of device he's creating. It would have to have essence within it, and this device would have to look at another magical object and then somehow form the essence inside of it to be almost like a mirror image. In my mind, it almost sounds like a spiritual camera of sorts. It's almost like it's taking the image, a picture of what this magical item's essence structure would look like, and then it's almost like 3D printing the same essence structure out of essence within its own self. That's the only way I could theorize something like this even working in the first place, but it's all fantasy, so, whatever. To those of you who are new to today's episode, and I just spitballed this random tinfoil hat theory, I'm sorry. For those of you who are deep into the lore, that maybe made sense, I don't know. Anyways, so that's the device he's working on. People obviously think this is a really cool, really spiffy idea, as I'm sure they say. But he died, unfortunately, of old age, and so a lot of his notes were lost, especially when barbarians from a southern province, or a southern area anyways, been sacking the province of Maganon for years. Apparently he used an enchanted mold, which is very interesting because fungus in the world of Eora is often more than just mushrooms being mushrooms for mushroom's sake. They play a rather important role. If you play the second Pillars of Eternity game, there's an entire DLC that is very fungal themed, the Forgotten Sanctum DLC. So they play a rather large role. As well, we see in the game of Avowed coming out that the Dream Scourge largely manifests physically in the form of fungus. And so like there is a lot of themes tied to fungus within the stories that we see in Eora. So it's interesting to see Galef trying to create a magical device that can copy other magical objects, and he's using enchanted mold. It almost sounds to me like mold has a level of sentience within this world. I don't know. It's just a spitball theory. But anyway, so they want to find this guy's notes. An anonymous patron has been inquiring across the Eastern Reach, which is the continent that the first Pillars of Eternity game is founded on, even though they are only playing in the Nation of the Dyrwood. The Nation of the Dyrwood is on the larger continent called the Eastern Reach. Quick interjection while editing. I am just realizing now while listening to it that enchanted mold might actually also just mean like a mold that you place something in to create something that stays within a particular way, so like if you were to pour, I don't know, molten rock into a mold, then it would be in the shape of the sword or whatever the mold looks like. I read it like mold as in an enchanted mold, like an enchanted fungus, which might also be the case, but based off of the item description later in this episode that I read, I think it might actually be what I'm talking about now. So, I don't know, take it as you will, but I thought I'd just interject and put that here. All right, let's get back to the episode. So these people are trying to find these research notes using leads that were discovered by unknown means. So that's the pitch. That's the setup for this adventure. Now, let's read through the conclusion of how this adventure ends, at least in the canon of this world, and talk about what we're seeing there. Companion's patron was silent about the source of their leads, but the notes quickly proved to be valuable. A grimoire sale in the Seathwood and notes from a dead Raed Saren wizard pointed the way towards 3 other wizards that were unwittingly performing research based on Galef's stolen notes. Spread out across the Eastern Reach, the wizards were amiable enough, but quite unwilling to part with their own extensive notes. After reporting back to the patron's servant, Companion discovered that no additional services were required. It wasn't until after returning to Caed that Companion learned of the grisly deaths of the 3 wizards, all under suspicious circumstances. A short time later, a package arrived via guarded courier. It was addressed to the Companion, and the note inside simply read, "A gift," in an antiquated hand. The gift in question is called the Hellwax Mold. It is a consumable item, which, interestingly enough, will create a duplicate of an item. You get 1 charge with it. So, the description for it reads, "This hinged mold has the amazing power to fully duplicate non-soulbound weapons, shields, armors, and other equipment placed inside of it. The immense magical energy required to fabricate the copy uses the mold for raw material and wholly consumes it in the process." So it sounds like the mold itself actually reforms itself into a copy of these objects. It says here it can't be non-soulbound weapon, and there's probably some balance issues for that game-wise, but lore-wise, it's really interesting. So it sounds like his device was theoretically able to do the things that it was able to do. This is called the Hellwax Mold, and you get a copy, or you get one of the prototypes for it, I guess, as a result. I did this adventure playing Pillars of Eternity, and I never read the description the first time I played the game, and so I didn't realize that I actually had this crazy magical artifact that could duplicate something. If I had done that, man, there's so many things I would have duplicated, or at least thought about duplicating, so I missed out on my first playthrough. But anyways, that's the conclusion of what we have here. So your companion goes out to different areas to follow these leads. It says here that they go to the Seathwood, which is actually across the ocean from the Dyrwood, where Caed is, over to the Empire of Aedir. The Seathwood is part of the Empire of Aedir. As well, it sounds like they found a dead Raed Saren wizard. It doesn't mean that we went to the nation of Raed Saris, which is just north of the Dyrwood, back on the Eastern Reach continent. They already went to Aedir, so they might have gone all the way to Raed Saris as well. Either way, you follow up on these leads, you find these wizards that do end up having some of these notes, and you report back to this patron who's like, "Yeah, that's fine. I didn't need any more. I just paid you to find them," and goes about their merry way. And then, coincidentally enough, these wizards end up dead under grisly circumstances. Now, obviously, this person had them killed and then took their notes and created the Hellwax mold to because finish the research to finish creating the thing. All right, but who was this person? Why were they willing to kill for it? Et cetera, et cetera. What were all these things about? Now, there could be a couple of interesting ideas. One, it could just be a wizard who sees the potential of this for something. So perhaps they have a plan, like a long-term endgame goal of something they want to do with this object. Like, think about if you can duplicate any small object in the world, what that could mean. Like, could you create a forgery of something and replace it and take that away, right? For example, like the scepter that you have at Aedir, the Inagird, which has got all the souls of previous emperors inside of it. If you could replicate, even if it wasn't exactly the same thing, obviously it would be impossible, but if you could replicate an indiscernible object and replace that thing and then steal that particular piece of Adra with all of those souls of dead kings and queens inside of it, that's a pretty big thing to be able to do, right? So there's a lot of things that this person could do. Another thing that could be going on is actually that this person, this patron who is paid to find all of these notes, they could actually be a reincarnation of the wizard Galef. Because your soul being awakened to your past life, or your past lives, I guess, is something that is very possible within this world. In fact, your player character has that going on. So it very well could be this unknown patron is a reincarnation of Galef, and that also explains how they were able to follow on some of these leads, because they remember being killed, and they even remember a little bit about the barbarians. Perhaps they were following leads of their own, right? So I personally, I'm a little bit more leaning towards that, and a mixture of the first one. Perhaps Galef has a long-term plan on what he wants to do with this device, but that's very possible for something that could happen. So that's the first grand adventure. Let's move on to the second and final grand adventure in all of the ones I've read throughout this podcast history. This one is called They Who Woke the Stars.
If you find your trail has run cold, come to me with whatever you have. There is much I may be able to do for you.
The pitch for this adventure reads, the Glonfathan astronomers who predicted the Lover's Tide that destroyed Andra's gift took many of their instruments and notes and hid them out of fear that they might be captured by Aedirans. Decades after the war, the tribes recovered the astronomers' work. Unfortunately, all the original astronomers had died, and much of their writing was penned in an unknown cipher. 2 Valiant dukes have offered a reward for anyone who can help crack the cipher for the Glonfathans. The tribes are reluctant to let anyone look at the notes, but believe it would be better to share their knowledge than let it remain a secret. All right, so there's a little bit of context we need to go for here. It's mostly the historical stuff. So Glonfathans. I've already mentioned the nation of the Deerwood in the larger continent of the Eastern Reach. This is where the first Pillars of Eternity game is set. On this continent of the Eastern Reach, the Deerwood was a colony, as I've mentioned, but there were already native tribes that were living in the area, technically speaking, and these are the Glonfathan tribes. So the Glonfathan tribes are the people that have already been living on this continent beforehand. One of the areas that they excelled in within their culture is astronomy, so they were very scientifically minded in that regard. They were the ones who predicted an event called a Lover's Tide. This is technically a celestial event, but it happens on the planet. In the world of Eora, there are actually 2 moons. You're usually going to see one in the sky, and the other one is supposed to be too small to really notice, but they'll probably still make it visible in the game because it's cool, let's admit it. Now, when the orbits of these 2 moons coincide, they create massive tidal forces that result in these cataclysmic events known as a Lover's Tide. It causes giant waves, the tide just goes way higher than it's supposed to go, and it can do a lot of destruction. Such as they mention here, predicted the Lover's Tide that destroyed Andra's gift. Andra's gift is a section of a city. It's just the name given to that district. So in the nation of the Deerwood, there is a major city settlement on the ocean at the bay, and it's called Defiance Bay. So that's the name of the city. And Defiance Bay has many districts in it. You have Brackenberry district, where I think a lot of the more rich people live, as well as that's where one of the sanitariums are. You have the First Fires district, where a lot of the government administrative work is done. And you have Andra's Gift, which was, I think, more of a port district than anything else. But during what is called the War of Defiance, when Deerwood went to war with its mother nation of Aedir to achieve their own independence as their own nation, during the War of Defiance, there was a lover's tide that completely destroyed that entire district of the city. And you can go there in the Pillars of Eternity game, and you can see that it is just a wreck. Like, it's still there, and you can still walk around, but it's very clearly something that was destroyed a long time ago, and they just haven't put the work into rebuilding it. So this lover's tide destroyed Andra's gift. And it was the Glonfathan astronomers and their knowledge of astronomy that they were able to predict this lover's tide and use it to their advantage within the war against the Adirans. Obviously, they're in the middle of a war. They have a lot of notes about, things like lover's tide, and you don't want that falling to the wrong hands. So these Glonfathan astronomers wrote all their notes in a cipher and then hid them away. Well, now it's decades after the war. Political strife is, I think, died down a little bit. People don't hate each other as much. And so there isn't the need to hide this information anymore. But unfortunately, it was still written down in a cipher that no one knows anymore because all of those original astronomers are dead. So there are these two Vailian dukes that are trying to get people to crack this cipher so that people have access to these research notes and that, the world can know a little bit more about some of this astronomical science. So that's a pitch. Now let's go through the conclusion of what your companion does. Though backed by the money and spies of two Vailian dukes, Companion had difficulty cracking the Glonfathan astronomer's code. Many of the Glonfathans who initially appeared helpful turned out to be saboteurs who believed that outsiders could not be trusted with Glonfathan secrets. A series of ambushes and difficult chases through Glonfath eventually brought Companion face to face with the great-great-granddaughter of one of the Orlan astronomers who predicted the Lover's Tide. She threatened to destroy the key to translating the cipher, but Companion was able to negotiate a limited translation of the key astronomical information. In the end, the Vailian Dukes were a bit disappointed as they had hoped to learn additional secrets of Glonfathan astronomy. However, even the information Companion recovered was fascinating to the Vailian astronomers. So it sounds like there is still a little bit of bad blood between some of the nations and cultures, understandably so, especially if you know the lore of that. If you're interested at all about it, by the way, a lot of my earlier episodes in this podcast deal with those historical wars and events. But yeah, so the companion that you send out to do this quest, they try their best to get some of the astronomer's code, but they're having trouble with it. And there are a lot of Glonfathan people who are distrustful towards outsiders. And that's very true. When you play Pillars of Eternity, you do see the Glonfathans that can be, I think xenophobic is the word. They definitely are not trusting of people outside of their own community, especially given the history between them and the colonists in the area. But, given some difficult work and some dangerous work that you put the companion in, they managed to find one of the ancestors of the actual astronomers who did this astronomy that wrote these ciphers. She's not really willing to give you the key to translating the entire thing, but she is willing to, through negotiation, give some of the translation. So, the people who hired you a little disappointed, but ultimately they get something, which is better than nothing. And I'm sure it's still fascinating. I know I would find it fascinating, because I love the lore of this world, so I'm kind of biased that way, and that's just pretty much how it goes. I think it'd be a really interesting adventure to run if you were doing a tabletop game. The item that you get for completing this off-screen adventure is an item called the Constellated Cloak, which apparently was added in the White March Part 2 DLC. So I've never looked this up or anything like that. So if anyone who was around for Pillars of Eternity 1 back when they were going through these development cycles, were the Stronghold missions added after the White March? I hadn't heard about Pillars of Eternity by the time White March came out, so I wasn't there to live through that. But anyways, you get this item called Constellated Cloak. It's just described as a dazzling cloak that was a gift from two Vailian Dukes as a reward for helping you recover lost Glonfathan astronomical knowledge. Sorry, I don't know why I'm tripping over my own words here. Looking at the cloak from different angles produces a variety of shimmering colors and creates the illusion that you are gazing into an impossibly deep expanse of space. So it's mostly just aesthetic description there, but still pretty cool. It gives you the spell Dimensional Shift once per rest, and it boosts your reflex plus 12. So that's pretty good. Wow, what a cloak. Reflex is one of the skills that you use for defense. But anyways, we're not going to talk about gaminess here. All right, and those are all the adventures I have time for today. So we're going to jump into the question of what might this have to do with Avowed, and then we're going to close out the episode.
Is an oath worth the weight of a crown?
Now, the only thing I can think of is that some of the lore that we see in these two adventures might come to fruition in the game of Avowed. It's unlikely because I don't think that Obsidian is going to take every tiny granular piece of lore and event that we see in the previous Pillars games and find a way to transpose it into Avowed for two reasons. One, there's way too much. And two, they have their own story to tell with Avowed. They don't need to expand upon all the old stories from Pillars of Eternity, as interesting as they are. But that being said, for the point of speculation, let's ask what might happen. And personally speaking, the most likely scenario I could see happening is that item that duplicates magical objects. I could see that popping up somewhere in Avowed, right? Because that is a crazy powerful object, and it would be a really, really sneaky way of turning the narrative on its head, right? Like if you, the envoy in Avowed, you're pursuing this, like, let's say high tier object, or like there's something that you're trying to steal or get from someone, or, something of vast importance that you need for the critical path, and you go through all this effort to get it. Hopefully not too much, because if they pull this twist on you, but you go through all this effort to get it, and whether or not your character actually discovers this in the game at all, or if it happens later or in that moment, but it turns out that that object that you got ended up being just a duplicate and someone else also has a copy of it. So it's still powerful and it's going to do the thing you want. But then if you ever discovered that someone else also had an exact copy of that thing that you were pursuing, how might that change the narrative of Avowed? So I feel like that's a really useful little device that Obsidian can hold on to for, just the sake of like, okay, we need to do a head turn on the narrative for whatever reason. We can use this thing that we've created from Pillars of Eternity to be able to do that. Theoretically, it's definitely possible, especially since Galef was an Aediran wizard, and theoretically speaking, if his soul was awakened, he would go to Living Lands, because Aedir clearly has an interest in the Living Lands. So I could see something like that happening. As far as the astronomical notes go, unless the rest of the astronomical notes are discerned or deciphered, or if that astronomical code is released, like what we have already is released in a way that we can read in the game, I don't see it making an appearance in Avowed. Although you never know, maybe there will be one of those in-game books we can read, and it'll just be about astronomical data for nerds like you and me to be able to read. I don't know. Those are just two guesses. But that is everything I can think of. I'm sure there's more examples, but I'm not going to sit here for hours thinking about it. If you have any thoughts about what we've talked about today on any of these adventures, not just the stuff I brought up, but any of the adventures, on how it might be related to Avowed or how they could use it in Avowed, I'd love to hear your speculations. I'd love to hear your theories or even just your creative ideas. Send me an email, worldofeora@gmail.com. And I suppose, while we're on the topic of socials and all that, we should get to closing out the episode. If you'd like to email me, you can do so at worldofeora@gmail.com. At anything you'd like to talk about at all. It can be about the show, questions, criticisms, comments, things like that. You can ask questions about the world of Pillars of Eternity if you're new to it, or questions you have about Avowed, or if you have topic ideas that you would like, by all means, go ahead and do that. Or what game you've been playing lately. If you've been playing a game and you recently had a great aha moment, or you have something that you want to share with someone, but maybe you don't have any gamers that like the game you're playing or something like that, by all means, reach out. I play a wide breadth of games. I love having conversations about this stuff, and I love talking about the world of Eora at large. So go ahead and do that if you're so fancy. Otherwise, if you want to, you can follow me on Twitter at World of Eora. Or if you are interested in supporting the show directly, you can do so at ko-fi.com/worldofeora. Thank you so much to everyone who has already contributed. It means a lot to me that this show has added value to your days, I guess, enough that is something that you were driven to do. I truly do appreciate it. For anyone there who likes the show, but you're not sure if you want to or can't afford to support it, by all means, do not worry about it. I'm happy to continue doing this show for free. But that's everything to talk about there. The only thing left is, I guess, wrapping up what I've been playing, and because some of you like that for some reason. I mentioned last episode how I've gotten back into Grounded, and I'm still playing Grounded, but I'm only really doing it once a week with my gaming crew. So we're really getting slapped around in that game right now because we started New Game Plus, and the enemies are just beating the piss out of us. So I think we're a little spoiled. We're used to being able to run around freely around Grounded's backyard without much of a care in the world, and now we kind of have to care a little bit again. But that's not the game I've been playing in my free time. Honestly, what I've been playing in my free time is Pillars of Eternity 2. With Obsidian doing their Road to Avowed live stream, which you might have heard of, Obsidian, the creators of Avowed and Pillars of Eternity, they are doing a live stream called Road to Avowed, which is them playing Pillars of Eternity with developers from the studio there to like answer questions live on Twitch and talk about the development processes, which is really interesting. And they recently finished Pillars of Eternity 1, and they're starting up Pillars of Eternity 2. And I've been kind of following this, and now that they're starting up Pillars of Eternity 2, I thought to myself, this would be a really good time for me to also replay that game. Like, I like Pillars of Eternity 1, but right now I'm kind of feeling more Deadfire vibes. Like, I kind of like the vibe that game has, so I'm wanting to dive into that game, and I think it just, with Avowed coming out soon, it just also makes sense. Now, I've played both of these games so much that I now have a hard time getting into role-playing characters, especially since, like, I'm a dad and I don't have a lot of time to play games. Because I've seen so much of these two games, replaying content just isn't as engaging for me when I only get to play a little bit maybe every other day. But there are a couple of playthroughs that I've always wanted to do. One is a goofy playthrough, which I did start, and that is an all-ranger/chanter multi-class party made up of godlikes, mostly. And the reason for that goofy playthrough is just the amount of people you can have on the board during combat, because you have the 5 major characters, and then they each have a pet, and then you can summon in a whole bunch of creatures because you're a chanter. And so pretty quickly, I can have upwards of, like, what would it be, like 20 something people in a combat fighting. Granted, the summons are not usually very strong for the level I'm at, but, just having those overwhelming numbers on the board, I've always wanted to do that playthrough just to see, like, experiment with it. Not because I think it's the greatest playthrough ever. I just wanted to have fun with it. And I had it on veteran mode for a while, and I'll say this, it was trivially easy for parts of the game. I only got as far as getting to Nekataka, mind you, with a little bit of exploring, so I haven't really tested it on anything really difficult. But yeah, it's been like very trivially easy. Once you have all the summons out, especially when you get like the worms or dragons or whatever, there's so many things going on. But I'm sure I'll run into an enemy that just blasts through whatever defenses they have or one-shots all my summons and my pets. But regardless, it's been fun. It's my goofy playthrough right now. I'm also doing it where every single time I have a dialogue option to attack somebody, I choose it, no matter what. So I've pissed a lot of people off so far. As well, I selected the history, the everything bad history, which is one I've always wanted to do, but I've almost always carried a playthrough over from the first Pillars game, so I never did one of those pre-selected ones. So this is the first time I've ever done that. So that's one of my playthroughs that I want to do. The other one is a role-playing playthrough where I am playing as a very nationalistic Aediran and a very pro-Woodican follower. And I've chosen to do this one with Avowed coming out recently, or soon, because you are a character from Aedir in the game of Avowed, and the Steel Garrote is a paladin order that we see in the game of Avowed, and that is actually one of the subclasses of paladin that you can play in the second Pillars game, but not in the first. So I made that character as well, and I've gotten 2 Nekataka, and I think that's the one that I'm going to stick with. I've also created companions in that playthrough that mimic the companions that we see from Avowed with what little knowledge we have. So I've created Kai and Giada and Yatsli and Marius. I've created all 4 of those companions, and I'm bringing them along with me for that ride in that playthrough. And it's been really fun, like kind of like theory crafting what might these characters be like. Yatsli, for instance, the only thing I knew about her for sure was that she had access to an ability called Arduous Delay of Motion. We hear Carrie Patel mention this in passing at one point. And so I have created Yatsli in Deadfire, and I've kind of built her up to be more about buffing and debuffing, but mostly debuffing enemies than anything else. And we know that Giada is kind of a healy character, so I've made her very much the healing priest of the group. But like trying to figure out what I think these characters might be like has been interesting. It's also maybe get a little excited about meeting them in the actual game of Avowed, and it's just, it's something fun to play. And I think that playthrough will lose steam after Avowed comes out. Mostly because I'll be playing Avowed, but also because like I'll know what Kai and them look like, right? So that's kind of the playthrough I'm going with right now. I don't know if I'm going to stick with it. The thing is, like I said, I've played Pillars of Eternity so much that I'm kind of at the point now where I start playthroughs and then I put them down for a while and I come back to them later when I don't know what else to play. So hopefully I stick with it, but if not, whatever. I know I'm looking forward to Veilguard coming out at the end of the month, so that's going to be my main thing once that comes out. Anyways, sorry I rambled on. That's what I've been playing. What have you been playing? And I'm actually genuinely curious, what weird playthroughs in Pillars of Eternity 1 or 2 have you done? I'm really interested to hear about it. There's a guy on the Project Eternity Reddit right now who's talking about his battle mages all the time, and I'm definitely here for it to hear the stories that go on, or seeing what Fury Druids are up to. It's always really interesting stuff to see. So, yeah, send me an email, worldofeora@gmail.com, but let's close out the episode. Thanks, everyone, for listening to today's episode, where we looked at the adventures, or the remaining adventures anyways, that we have from the stronghold of Caed, being the lord of that castle keep, sending companions off to do different missions in the world, and just learning about what the lore and the implications of some of those things are. Thanks, everyone, for joining me on that. I'm your host, Eric, aka Gingerino, and I'll see you guys next time.